Hi everybody, Golden Era Bookworm here. Today I'm going to continue with Vince Gironda's expert tips on abdominals, but this is part 2, so we're going to focus now on the abdominal specialization exercises and look a little bit more deeply into the diet that he recommended for defining the abdominal region. Just a quick summary of part 1. I have done the first video which covered his expert tips, which mainly looked at increasing the metabolic rate of the person to induce fat burning, that is subcutaneous fat burning, supplementation of things like using things like kelp tablets and lipotropics, as well as hyperventilation in between sets was another thing that he recommended. Training abs like any other muscle is something that he always said, because he believed that training abdominals for thousands and thousands of reps mainly would cause a massive shock to the body, decreasing muscle size and smoothing out the abdominal region. He also was against training for the abdominals for absolute beginners because it stunted muscle growth. And finally, he was a great advocate of removing the fat, the subcutaneous fat around the abdominal region, because otherwise one could not see what the person was lacking muscularly, and therefore he could not prescribe any specialization exercises for the abdominal region. As he put it, before you train abs, you need to actually be able to see them. Now, speaking of training abs, let's look at the exercises that Vince would recommend for abdominal specialization. Here is Vince when he first invented the frog sit-up. The frog sit-up, as it's described in Unleashing the Wild Physique, or The Wild Physique, that he wrote. It was a book that he wrote with Kennedy. He has more than one version, but the version from this book, and as shown here, is where you basically lie, as always, with the small of your back, that is the lower back, is kept on the bench or on the floor, and the feet are actually placed together. You can actually see that his feet are actually placed together. And placing the hands behind your head, you actually contract and come up for 2 seconds, bringing your head as far as you can up, and then lying back down. Performed for 8 reps for 3 to 5 sets or whatever. That will train the rectus abdominis. But this is another image actually from one of his books, where he actually shows the feet. They are actually crossed over and almost tucked right under the buttocks, and this time his hands are over the abdominal region. Again, the small of the back is on the bench or on the floor. The chin is on the chest. The elbows are up, and you exhale as you contract the abdominals. There are different versions of the frog sit-up, as you can see. Here's another image from Vince's books. This is called the hip roll, and it's a different exercise that actually works the lower abdominals. The palms, as you can see, are flat on the bench or the floor and tucked underneath. The abs are sucked in. The chin is on the chest, and the head and the shoulders are pulled forward. The legs are crossed over, and you're supposed to pull your legs towards your chest until your knees are basically over your chest. And you repeat this for 8 reps for several sets. Basically, that's the hip roll for the lower abdominals. Of course, he also believed in keeping a tight midsection. This is one of my favorite photos with Frank Zane. He's just smiling, probably looking at everyone's gasping faces as he holds that wonderful vacuum. This is probably his most famous photo, Frank Zane's vacuum. I mean, he owned that pose, and he probably trained this just like Vince recommended. Basically, chin on chest, inhale, then exhale completely, fingertips on a bench, bend the knees, hunch the upper back, and draw the abs into the chest. The idea of doing a vacuum is to actually think that you're drawing your belly button into your spine, right? Eventually you should be able to draw your organs all the way up your rib cage and be able to basically cause an enormous gap in the region below the rib cage to form to give the appearance of a complete vacuum in the region. That's why it's called the vacuum, and it definitely keeps the midsection tight. It actually works the transverse abdominis. That is a muscle that runs horizontally around, and it basically is like a waist belt, right? It's like a waist belt, your own personal gym belt basically. The crunch, this is a bit pixelated unfortunately, this image, but the crunch was invented by Vince Gironda, and this is one of the many versions that he had. Basically, he called it the low abdominal sit-up over the bench, where the knees are bent and over the bench, the heels hang over the toes point back. Again, the lower back is on the floor. You hunch up, hands clasp the back of their heads, the elbows point forward, and the chin is on the chest. It's basically very similar. Most of his exercises had this particular starting point, right? It becomes rather obvious after a little while. And then it's only a few inches that you crunch forward, and basically that's why it's called the crunch. For those of you that didn't know, Vince Gironda invented the crunch. There's also the concentric crunch, where it's quite a similar motion, except you start with your feet. From memory, let's read I've got the book right next to me actually. You lie flat on the floor with the hands behind the head, and you bring your knees up over your hips while sitting up. Simultaneously, you bring the elbows forward as you come up, and you hold for 2 seconds. And with all these exercises, I should repeat and should emphasize this, Vince Gironda said you should always exhale completely all the air on contraction. And this will actually also help tighten the midsection. Exhaling on contraction is very important. Another exercise that he advocated was the stiff-legged raise. Stiff-legged leg raise. And this is unlike the normal leg raise because the head and the back of the person in this case is placed up against a bench or a wall. The hands are below the lower back or the hips. The legs are extended straight, and the toes are pointed forward. And then in an arch-like motion, you bring up the feet off the floor basically. You're actually supposed to keep the feet completely off the floor, as well as the buttocks. They should be completely off the floor. And you bring the legs all the way up by keeping the knees completely, well, not locked, but a little bit bent. But basically the leg remains straight, as you can read in this particular description. And you create this arc-like motion up and down, sucking in the abdominals, breathing out every time. And it really works the rectus abdominis. It is unlike a normal leg raise. As he says, if you touch the board with your toes, it brings the psoas into play. So they always have to remain off the board or off the floor. Finally, moving on to the diet. Now, in one of Vince's booklets, I got this information from actually. It's the US Air Force Academy diet. As mentioned earlier, Vince was a strong advocate of stating that for any ab specialization, diet is absolutely necessary and all fat should be removed off the waistline before. Then you can actually see what you need to work on. Let's look at the US Air Force Academy diet. The way this particular diet works is that you're only allowed 40 to 50 grams of carbohydrates every day. On such a diet, you would lose 7 to 14 pounds of fat per month. There is no limit on meat, eggs, cheese, fats of mainly the oil or butter kind, and vegetables. And this can be had for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And therefore, the idea is to limit fruits, especially very sweet fruits, and carbohydrates. It's a very simple diet, very similar to the steak and eggs diet, except that dairy products are allowed, such as cheese, and carbohydrates are limited to basically a small serving a day. I hope you have enjoyed watching part 2 of Vince Gironda's tips for ab specialization. Today we focus on exercise and diet. If you've enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. There'll be many more videos coming on Vince, and especially on other bodybuilders from the golden era, from the 40s, 50s, 60s and 70s in time. Thank you for watching. Leave me your comments. This is the golden era bookworm, and I hope you've enjoyed. Bye for now.